And let me say a good morning to everybody. I sure would like to see your marriage succeed. And if you're not married, when you get married, I'd like to see you do it for keeps. And I know it can. Margaret and I, goodness, that picture of that old couple there, that's us. And we've already exceeded 50 years by a while. So I told you about that guy over in East Texas, that kid that went downtown center. You know, they raise those big watermelons over there. And he went down there, and they had a contest going. Anybody that eat this big watermelon within 1 hour would get $50. So he said, I can eat that. He went up there, and he said, I can eat that watermelon. So they made a deal. It's, boy, you're too little. You're too skinny to eat that whole watermelon in an hour. He said, no, I can do it. So they said, okay, we sign you up. He said, I can do it, but I can't do it right now. You give me a little time. Give me about 3 hours, and I'll be back here, and I'll eat it. So sure enough, they agreed to that. And he went away, and about 3 hours later, he came back, and he said, I'm ready. They cut it. He ate the whole thing. And so after he ate it, they asked him, why did you need time? He said, well, I had one just like that at home, and I went home and ate it just to be sure that I could. Well, I know you can. I've done it. I mean, Margaret and I have been married 50 years, and so I'm talking from experience. It's not theory here, but I'll tell you there are some reasons why, and these are not all of them, but there are some of them, and I'm just going to run through here pretty quickly and talk to you about the number one ingredient in a marriage. The number one thing, these are 7 ingredients to 50 years of marriage success. And the number one ingredient is loving God's way. This you got to do first. First things first. It's the book of 1 Peter chapter 4 that says, above all things, have charity among yourselves. Did you hear that? Above, not equal to, not after other things, but above all things, have charity among yourselves. Now, in our world, especially this American world in which we live, love is abused. It's the very term love is abused. You know, we say, I love my wife and I love my horse or I love my dog in the same sentence, as if somehow we're using the word in the same way. Well, I don't love my wife the same way I love my horse. I don't believe that, well, I'm in love with this girl, so we're just going to have a one-night stand in a motel is love. I think that's lust. It's not the biblical word. In the Greek language, there are at least 5 words for love. And if you were looking in that language, you'd see the differences there. Like Philadelphia is one of those Greek words, Philadelphia, a Greek word meaning brotherly love. Well, that's not the same as phileo love, the kind of love that we have for a mate. We like each other and we love each other. And the Bible's main word, the Hebrew or the Greek word for love in your New Testament is Agape, agape love it's called. That's the love that says, I like you maybe, and maybe I don't like you, but I care about you and I will do right by you whether I feel like it or not. I don't do right by you because that I feel like you deserve it, or because you are good to me, or because I have a passionate affection for you sexually, or in some other. I'm going to do good for you because it's the right thing to do before God. It's love that is static. That's the kind of love that God has for us. God so loved the world, he had agape love for us. He didn't come down here in the person of Jesus Christ because we're good, because we were good to him. He came down here because we're sinners, and he came to do for us the right thing, the only thing really that could ever be done that would bring us forgiveness and give us eternal life. So we're talking about agape love, and I'm glad to say that this agape love is the kind that's talked about in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. By the way, in the Bible, there are some great passages on different subjects. Surely the passage dealing with the shepherd, the good shepherd passage, is Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. So you just think of that and you think, boy, here's what God is in shepherd sense to us. The one on love is 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is the great love text of the Bible. I wish I had time to read the whole thing, but I want you to listen to the first few statements in this chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not charity, I am become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. Charity is translated from that Greek word agape. We sometimes call it love. It can be translated love. The King James translators called it charity. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. Do all that good stuff, I'm nothing without love. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. I cannot imagine a greater sacrifice than to give yourself, your own body, to be burned for somebody else. I mean, that would be an ultimate sacrifice. I can't imagine a worse way to die than to burn to death, really. But this says you do all of that, you don't have right motive, you don't have love. It's just sort of like a nothing, just ding, and that's it. It's the last year of it. Look at the next part. This is the Bible's description of agape love. This is not a definition per se. It's love. The right kind of love is too great to be properly defined. It can only be properly described. And here's the Apostle Paul, inspired of God, and he defines it or describes it like this. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envies not. Charity doesn't vaunt itself or vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doeth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in the truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Charity never faileth. Did you hear that again? Charity never fails. It's just good. I mean, just there. Charity never faileth. But whether there be prophecies, it goes on and talks about those. And then it goes on in verse 13 and says, and now abideth faith, hope, charity, these three, but the greatest of these is charity or love. Wow. If your marriage is going to keep lasting very long, past, as I've indicated earlier in the week, the honeymoon part, especially when the body begins to give way, and she's not as pretty physically, outwardly, bodily as she used to be. And he's not the strong, big old Hulk that he was when you first knew him, with those great biceps and triceps. You need some love. She needs to look prettier to you than ever, not because she's pretty in the body altogether, but because she has a beautiful spirit, and you see her in that light. That's what agape love does. It doesn't just last while the glamour's there. Agape love, the kind that is necessary for a marriage to keep on lasting and producing, is this one that's described right here in the Bible. And it's volitional choice. God doesn't make you love anybody. You choose to love or not the people you love or not. That's not something we can tag on to God and say, well, God, it's your fault. You just made me like this. I don't like. You are the one who chooses. God gives us a volitional choice in our lives in lots of ways, and certainly this is one of them. And that love means God first. You put him. If your marriage is going to keep lasting, you love right. You understand what love is, and you love God first. Exodus chapter 20, when God was giving those 10 commandments, he said, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Nobody above me. Nobody over me. Nobody in my place. I am number one, and I want you to love me. Listen, you will never love your husband or your wife right unless you love God right. It is impossible. It's first God and then each other. In that order. You got to get your priorities right. Who is important? Most important. The best thing Margaret can say about me or pray about me is, I pray that my husband will love God more and more every day, because the more I love God, the more I will love her. They go hand in glove. But the less I love God, the less I will treat her like God says that I ought to treat her. By the way, Jesus weighed in on this very subject, and I'll bring it to your attention from Matthew. He said it in Matthew chapter 22, and listen to him in verses 37 and 38. Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. What does Jesus say? You love God first. He's not talking here particularly about marriage. He's talking about some other things, but it's just as applicable to marriage as it is to any other place. We have, if we expect the marriage to be strong, we have to love right. And loving right means God is first. And then we love our mate more than ourselves. I think if I know my heart, I would lay it all on the line, including my life, for that lady right there. Because she and her welfare is important to me. I've been married to her now these nearly 54 years, and we have, all of us, needs. So I have to think about our needs. But I do think about our needs, because I read back there in Genesis, when God brought Adam and Eve together, he said, they two shall be one. And that means that she's a part of this package. We're two bodies, but we're one entity. We're one marriage. She and I are both in it, and she is that other part of me that I need to think about when decisions are made. I realize the buck stops with me in a number of ways, in certain decisions. That's the way it is with the husband of the house. But I also realize that when I make the ultimate decisions that have to be made, maybe they're financial, maybe they're in other ways, I am thinking about her and her needs. After this long, we know each other pretty well. And I know what she likes and some things she does not like. And therefore, even if I didn't talk to her about them, and I normally do, I would still know what she wants, and I would never make a decision about our marriage, where we're going to live, where we're going to go to church, how we're going to spend our money, even the kind of foods we eat, the places we go if we take on a trip, without her being a part of that decision. It's not a unilateral decision. You should never in your marriage make a unilateral decision when it comes to the marriage and the relationship. It should be bilateral. That is, you're making it, but she's making it or he's making it. It's a decision between you. The two of you have joined together, and you're meeting her needs. And of course, when we have children, we have to also take into consideration their needs, especially when they're at home children. When they move out and establish their own homes, it's a little different picture. But at home, we have to take that into consideration. And that's what the Bible's talking about here. Loving your mate and putting your mate's needs up there with or above your own needs. And Jesus says this. Listen to this same 22nd chapter where I was reading a moment ago, and continuing in verse 39, and the second, talking about the great commandments, he said, the second is likened to it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Who is your neighbor? This guy right here, this guy he was talking to. So, well, who's my neighbor? Well, Jesus answered that too. But your wife is your neighbor. You might think of her as your wife, yes, but she's still another human, and she falls into the neighbor category. And you're to love her just like you love yourself. Yeah, love thy neighbor as thyself. And then look at this, a strange conclusion that Jesus makes here. He said, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Two commandments. What are they? Love God first, right first. Love your neighbor right second. On these two. You say all that stuff about eating food, all that stuff about your bull pushing somebody else's bull, you paying restitution, all that stuff about sacrifices in the temple. What do you mean? Jesus said, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. If you don't have love in the picture, all that other stuff's not going to work very well. You got to get first things first. Foundation. And I'm saying that you want your marriage to keep lasting. You want a successful marriage after 50 years. You're going to have to get love into the picture. And these other scriptures here talk about husbands, love your wives, and then turn around and say, wives, love your husband. It's just love is right over. It's all over the Bible. This is God's love letter to us. It's really a love letter. It's a letter about how to have a successful marriage, how to have a successful life, how to run a successful business, how to take care of the earth, how to rear kids, how to do everything just right. This is God's wonderful book for us. Do not tolerate selfishness in your own self. I tell young preachers, while you're preaching, you need to keep an eye on the audience. You certainly want to keep an eye on the Lord, but you need to keep your eye on your own self. You need to listen to what you're saying up there while you're preaching. Hear it. I've been up preaching sometime, and I said, did I say that? You came out of there and think, wait a minute here. It's not what I really meant. You got to pay attention to yourself in your marriage. It's not all about you. It's about your mate and others, but especially about your mate, which means you cannot allow selfishness to get in. And your wife shouldn't have to say, wake up. You ought to wake up on your own. Yeah, sometimes your wife does have to kick you in the shins or somewhere else. Real hard. But we ought to wake up. We ought to pay attention to who we are and what we're doing in our lives and not tolerate self. Jesus said, if any man will be my disciple, let him take up his cross daily and follow me. For he that exalts himself shall be abased, and he that abases himself shall be exalted. Why on earth would you think Jesus would say, take up a cross? Do you know what a cross is made for? Why it came into existence? It was the Romans' way of killing people. It's an electric chair for the Romans. That was its only function. They hanged men out on the cross, on a public street, where everybody could see, in a busy intersection, so that everybody going by could see, you lift your finger against Rome, and here's where we'll put you, buddy. And it takes about 3 days or so for most people to die on a cross. They hang up there, and if they're strong, they can keep pushing themselves up and pushing themselves up. Because what happens after a while, they slump down and it cuts off the circulation somewhat and the breathing. They begin to suffocate, so they push themselves back up to get another breath until they just wear out, and it takes a while to wear out to where they go down and they can't push back up again. And it is an agonizing thing, as I've read those accounts of people dying slow and agonizingly on a cross. And Jesus said, you need to get a cross in your life. A killing machine. For what? For self. Put yourself. He that would be my disciple, let him take up his cross daily. Every day, self wants to come back. Self has that resurrection power. Every one of us would come down front. We'd like for one trip down front. We surrender all, and we say, oh God, I want to serve you good forever, and we're done forever. It doesn't work that way. Because self, you put him on a cross down front here and say, I surrender all to the Lord, and old self will be back tomorrow and say, hey, glad to see you again. Hey, you need to take care of you. Take a few selfies. Don't think about your wife. Don't think about your husband. Do what you need a little time to you. You need a little money and fun. Yeah, the devil's like that. He uses self. And Jesus said, you need to get used to crucifying self. Every day coming back and say, it's not all about me. It's not my life. I am a Christian. I have been bought with the price, the blood of Jesus Christ. He owns me. He is my master. I have to obey him. It's not what I want, it's what he wants. And one of the things he's made as clear as your hand in front of your face is, I'm to take care of my mate. In a marriage, I'm to be a servant to her or to him. If you want your marriage to do well, one of the ingredients that has to be there, and I'd say chief ingredient, is that you love God's way. Not Hollywood's way, and not your way, but you love God's way. And then number two, that you focus on giving. That needs to go into the mix, a focus on giving. Not on getting, but on giving. Giving is God's way. He's the one that says it. God so loved the world that he gave. You hear that? The God of heaven, who owes nobody anything and nobody could ever overpower him and make him do anything, voluntarily determined to give his only begotten Son, not for good people but for sinners, so that we could have forgiveness of sins and eternal life. Wonderful. You see the heart of God. No wonder 1 John says God is love. He is love. I mean, he manifested. Hereby perceive we the love of God, in that he laid down his life for us. 1 John 3 and verse 16. And the Bible says he gives and gives. He giveth more grace when the burdens are heavier, doesn't he? He sustains us when we're in the valleys of life. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. The God of heaven, always giving, letting us live in his world, breathe his air, drink his water, have his life in us, not because we could take it from somebody else, but because he lets us live here at his goodness and his mercy. And he, in his word, says in Acts chapter 20 and verse 35, it is more blessed to give than to receive. You will never take away from here what you get. It's only what you give that will outlast you. You will leave everything you have here except what you've given to other folks, and not just tangibly, but given of your heart, given of your life, given of your wisdom to your children and to people around you. So sadly, our world is caught up with getting, and it's all about me, when the heart of the Bible and the heart of true success is about giving and getting, and it's not about me. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 24 says, there is that scattereth and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. Holding in, getting, is a poor way to live. And Jesus says the way to get is by giving. If you want to get more, give more. You say, man, I'd like to have a big old bicep here like Brother Hutson. Go to the gym. I'm just being facetious. You understand? I'm telling you, the truth though is, if you want a better body, the way to do is go down there and give reps. You know, get on that treadmill, get out there and walk, do those setups or whatever you need to do. That's how to strengthen those muscles. Isn't that what they do with you at therapy? There's a lady named Nancy Langford. She's a godly lady. And I went to see her one day down in Houston. She's kind of older. She'd been a widow a long time. And man, when I went into her room, it was obvious when I could see her through the door before I got to the end of the hall. She's in the room at the end of the hall, that she just wasn't happy that day. And I said, Sister Betty, what's wrong? She said, I'm mad. I said, what are you mad at, Sister Betty? I'm mad at these people. They're working me to death. They think I got to go down there and work myself every day. I said, well, Sister Betty, they're just trying to help you to get stronger here. But you ever feel that way? I have. I know. Well, you give by giving, not just in terms of your body, but in terms of love. If you want more love, give more. If you want people to treat you kinder, maybe you need to be a little kinder. If you'd like to make a little money, you've got to invest some out there somewhere. You got to give some. You got to stick it out there into the marketplace. Well, number 3 is forgiveness. Forgiveness. Don't hold grudges anywhere in your life, let alone, much less in the home. Don't hold a grudge against your mate, your husband, your wife. Gracious. Leviticus 19 and verse 18 says, thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge. That's Old Testament. You say, well, that's just Old Testament. James says, chapter 5, verse 9, grudge not one against another. Brethren, be not, lest you be condemned. Don't grudge. Don't hold something. Don't get something in your craw that you can't get out or won't get out. It's not that really you can't. It's just that you won't get out. If thou bring thy gift to the altar, and remember, that your brother has aught against you, go to him and be reconciled, and then come and offer your gift. Isn't that the teaching of Jesus Christ? He simply said, just don't hold grudges. This text, I don't have nearly the time to read Matthew about turning things loose, but Matthew 18, Jesus is talking, and I encourage you to go into your Bible and read verses 21 through 35. And we normally see this section about Peter coming to Jesus and say, how many times shall I forgive my brother if he offends me? And Jesus says, till 7 times 70. And we read it and we say, yeah, boy, that smites me. Well, it does, but there's more to this story, and you'll find it in these verses that are under consideration here. And the basis of the story in short form is that there was a fella who was quite wealthy, and he determined to bring some of his accounts into balance, and so he called some people that owed him money, servants that owed him some money, and one servant owed him lots and lots of money. And he said, it's time to pay up. And they in those days had the right to put you in prison. If you didn't pay, they could take you or maybe your son or your daughter or your family and make servants out of them to pay the debt. So this is what was facing this fellow who couldn't pay this big sum of money to the owner. And he began to plead. He said, I can't pay it. I don't have enough money. I can't do it. Would you be merciful? He pled for mercy. Mercy. And the owner was merciful and said, yes. And he told him, you go out and you take care of some business and you come back and we'll do it. I'm going to give you a little time, basically the idea. And this guy who had gotten mercy from the owner, he also had some people who owed him a little money, much lesser sum, just much lesser amount, but nevertheless owed him some money. And he went out, Jesus said, and the man who owed him 100 pence couldn't pay him. And he said, buddy, you better pay me. I'm going to throw you in jail. The guy said, I can't. Please be merciful to me. And he was not merciful. He had the guy thrown in jail because he couldn't. The guy who had been given these thousands would not forgive that one who had hundreds. And the word got back to the master, and he said, you are a wretch. I'm putting that in East Texas. Do you know what I mean? You are sorry. You've had so much given to you, and you won't turn around and be merciful to the person in your life. You know what that story's about? It's first about Jesus Christ, God through Jesus Christ, who's forgiven you and me multitudes of wrongs. And then turns around and says to you as a husband, be kind and good to your wife. Wife, you need to cut your husband a little slack. And we won't do it. That's the picture. It is not a really bright picture for people who are unmerciful. What I'm saying is we have to learn how to forgive. To be Christian and for your marriage to survive and do well, you have to employ forgiveness. That has to be a mix in it. That's the reason I said one night here, I've done my fair share of wedding ceremonies, and for many years I have made it a point to include in my little miniature sermon that I do in the middle of that wedding ceremony, you're going to need to forgive. You got to learn how to forgive this lady, because as beautiful as she is, and you think spotless, she's got a little devious streak in her. And one day it'll show up, buddy, and you're going to have to forgive her for something that she had no business of doing. But if you think that's a little hard for you, you got a big devious streak in you too, mister. And this girl's going to have to forgive you. So don't get so high and heady-minded that you think, oh, I'm not going to do it, bless God. She shouldn't have said that. She shouldn't have done that. Well, who hadn't said it or done what you shouldn't have done? We've all had a slip of the tongue or a fit of anger or done something that we knew we shouldn't have done. Best thing you can do when that happens is fall on your knees and say, I beg your forgiveness, honey. I'm sorry. And ask her or him to forgive you. And then in turn, you do the same kind of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a vital, it's not an optional part of a healthy marriage. It is a vital part of a good marriage. And I will tell you that failure here is fatal. I go back to that Mark 3 and verse 23, and it's also Matthew 12, verse 25 section that I've called to your attention several times this week, and that is, a house divided cannot stand. And nothing will put a breach in there and separate you like a grudge, like something you didn't get past, something you didn't forgive. Number 4 on this list is tolerance. We all need a good measure of tolerance in a marriage. If you're going to expect it to keep getting better and last, then you got to learn how to tolerate things. Your mate is immortal, just like you. Ephesians 4, therefore, talks about forgiving, and that's kind of connects into what I was just discussing a moment ago. You can't have everything your way. It doesn't work that way. We all have to have some give and take. And some things we have to be giving in. We can't just get it. Proverbs 25 and verse 15 says, by long forbearing a prince is persuaded. Forbearing one another in love, Ephesians 4 and verse 2. Colossians 3:15 says it again, forbearing one another. So this is simply saying it won't always go your way. Don't expect it to. Know that sometimes you're going to have to take a few things. It's not going to be just what you'd like, but then sometimes it won't be what she likes, it won't be what he likes either. There's that give and take need in every marriage. And let me just caution you with what's just come up on the screen back here. Think before you go to war with your mate. Does it matter enough to destroy the marriage? Is what you're arguing about, fighting about, feeling sore in your heart about, worth pursuing, perhaps to escalate the war to the point of where you destroy each other and destroy the marriage in the process? I say to you what Jesus says, focus on the good. What I'm about to read to you is one of the scriptures you ought to put into your heart. Thy word have I hidden in my heart that I might not sin against thee, O God. This one's a good one to hide. Even if you can't quote it verbatim, get the idea and rehearse it to yourself. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. If you get to thinking on the bad, you'll think of more bad. I mean, there's plenty. Don't ask me to tell you about my bad streak. I don't want to talk about it, really. I mean, I talk to God about it. I talk to Margaret about it sometimes. But I'm telling you, I could name you a whole lot of weaknesses. And I do. I mean, in my time with God, I'm asking forgiveness. You know what I'd rather do? I'd rather think on the good. I'd rather think, Lord, I can at least do this and that. I thank you. If you start thinking about what's wrong with your mate, your list will get pretty long. And it'll get to eating at you. You start thinking about what you don't have and what the neighbors do have. It'll start working in your head. It's a bad direction. And God knows it's a bad direction. Therefore, whatsoever things are of good report, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are virtue, and those things, think on these. Let these dwell in you. Let these be in your heart. And then there's number 5, and that is planning. You have to put planning into the equation. You can't just amble along in a marriage and expect it to last. You got to think about where you are and about where you're going. I have another seminar just about done, and I call it Growing Old with Grace. It's especially aimed at older people, but it's not just aimed at older people. It's aimed at people who are going to get to be older if they don't run into a car or get shot or fall off a cliff or do something bad like that, you know. Really, the time to think about old age is not when you're old and gray. It's back here when you're young and viable. But anyway, in that seminar, I have a whole lot to say about planning, estate planning and other kinds of planning that need to be done. Because I have watched a lot of preachers and a lot of others besides who just sort of flipped along through their lives and through their marriage until they got old and gray and got turned out to pasture. Kind of like an old gray mule. Went home to live with their children unhappily ever after. And the kid's unhappy too, because I can't hardly feed myself, let alone mom and dad. And they're here now, I got to take care of them. Do you know what it's like to be a caregiver? Some of you do. Take care of somebody who's old or somebody who's down. And, you know, there's a way to plan. You can't necessarily guarantee that won't happen. But I'm just telling you, in your marriage, it's not just a matter, let's just take it happy-go-lucky, just every day at a time. You don't need to be worrying and fretting yourself altogether about a lot of things, but you need to be thinking about them, making some plans and some proactive steps that are aimed at success. Listen to this Proverbs, chapter 22 and verse 3. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. The simple just living from day to day, pass right on, don't think about where they're going, make any provision much for it. And there's another proverb, it's chapter 6. It's this Proverbs that says, go to the ant, thou sluggard. The ant just goes and works and gets leaves and puts them down in a hole in the ground, and when it gets cold and bad, the ant's down there and eating leaves and eating stuff they provided. Compare that, Proverbs says, to the grasshopper who just flits along. It's summertime and it's great. It's going to be warm and nice all the time. Got plenty to eat on these trees. I don't need to say it. I don't need to think about the future. And when it gets cold, the old grasshopper just sits up there and freezes to death. It's the Lord who drew the analogy. And he's talking about people. He's not just talking about ants and grasshoppers. He's talking about humans and about how we approach life. And he says there are wise people who look ahead and make some plans, and they do fairly well. And there are some who just flit along, and it doesn't go so well. And then they get mad at God, they get mad at each other, and just all kinds of bad things happen. Planning is necessary for a successful long-range marriage. And I wanted to point out to you, by the way, Proverbs 22 and verse 3 and also 27 and verse 12 say it the same thing, that's repeated. Not because God forgot it, he said it. It's important enough to repeat. I mean, it's that simple. It's that good. Constant diligence, constant adjusting needs to be done. Lord willing, Margaret and I will go to Houston tomorrow and down 45 through Dallas and right on down to 45 down to Houston. If I said to you, you know what we're going to do? We're going to set that little VIN on cruise control, and we're going to take a nap on the way. You'd say, see you in heaven, Brother Hutson. And after a long lawsuit for your kids, you can't just set your marriage on cruise control. You got to pay attention to the curves in the road and the stop signs and other traffic. You got to do it. Planning. Number 6 is communicating. I will not spend much time here simply because we spent a whole last night talking about communicating, and that's available to you. But I will say, take care of business and don't ignore reality. Differences need resolution. You have to address differences and resolve differences. Coming matters need to be addressed, like when the kids get married, and what's a wedding going to cost, and what about grandkids? When they go to college, they're going to need some help from Granny and Pa. What about when I retire? Am I going to have enough retirement? These are things that have to be addressed. And I will say, as a part of communicating, that means listening with your ears, but it also means listening with your eyes. You shouldn't wait for somebody, your mate, to tell you. Don't wait for what you should know to be expressed in words. You should know to prepare for the future. You should know, you should be paying attention. And when your wife's glasses are scratched up and she's getting to where she's squinting to see, she ought not have to say, honey, I'm needing some new glasses. I need to go to the eye doctor. You ought to be saying, honey, I need to take you. We wait, people that are mates, to come to us with things that are as obvious as they can be. That's an insult, really. Be kind always. I've said to a lot of people, kindness is always in order. Kindness is always in order. There's no excuse for being rude and ugly and mean. And be transparent. Always have absolute honesty. And finally, and number 7 on this list of 7 is keeping God first. We started there. We're coming back to there here. not only loving like God loves, but keeping him first, always in the marriage. Psalm 18 and verse 2. And this is a good passage. I want you to just hear it. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, my God, my strength, in whom I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. I will call upon the Lord. You're talking about a guy here who's got God way up on the high point in his life. I mean, he's got him up on the throne. Boy, that scripture right there makes me want to charge. I mean, it just says, sick 'em, boy. His is the name that is above every name. Jesus Christ, who is Lord of lords and King of kings. Stay in his word. Always. Job said, I have esteemed the words of thy mouth more than my necessary food. Job 23 and verse 12. Talk to him. Isn't it wonderful that you don't have to get an appointment to talk to the Creator God of the world? You can come to him. If you're a saved person, Jesus is your high priest. You can come boldly to the throne of grace. Why do we neglect to pray so much? Why do we put it off? And it becomes the last resort when it ought to be the first resort. Talk to your God. Keep him number one in your heart and in your marriage. And stay in church. You cannot love God right without loving the church, which he loves and gave himself for it. And said, don't forsake the assembling of yourself together. If you want your marriage to get in trouble, get out of church and begin to do other things and let the church come in second or third. Put God's work, his church, in your heart, high on the list, and be content with his provisions. You know, it was Paul who said, I've learned to be content in whatever state I'm in. Boy, don't you wish you could learn that? I'm not content if my house is not just clean as a whistle. I'm not content if I'm not able to pay everything just with ease. You know, sometimes we're just not very content. I don't mean you need to be slothful or lazy. Just learn to be content with what God has provided for you. Even if you're living in Texas, not whatever state, you can be content living in Texas or Oklahoma or whatever other state. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee.